life, in all its forms and in all its beauty, inspires a curiosity that ponders its origin. Competing stories seek to explain our origin and the complexity of life that surrounds us. Is naturalistic evolution responsible for all we see? Or is the complexity of life a clue to a mind behind nature? Award-winning spacecraft designer and engineering professor Stuart Burgess struggles to see how evolution could explain the natural world.
Engineers have recognized that the natural world contains supreme and supremely optimal design. I think evolutionists are surprised about that because according to evolution, things in nature should be less well optimized than human design because evolution is restricted by step change. And human design is not so restricted. There's higher, more optimal design in birds and insects and plants than there is in man-made design. So I think that's a great challenge to evolution. This is an example of a linkage mechanism that amplifies the motion of the wings. This represents the wing of an insect. And inside the body of the insect are these bars and pins. And what happens is a muscle drives this pin here, and as you can see, it amplifies the motion of the wing. And that's very difficult for engineers to replicate. As every engineer knows, you cannot evolve step by step a linkage mechanism. All of the links and the pins have to be there simultaneously. And when you look at the fossil record, you can't find examples of intermediates between a simple hinge and a complicated linkage mechanism like that. So I believe this is an example of irreducible complexity, a strong evidence of design.
Richard Dawkins says birds developed with no conscious design. A small dinosaur chasing flying insects started using its front limbs for lift, and they adapted into wings. Skin scales became feathers. It's a familiar story, but is it the most likely explanation? Professor Andy McIntosh teaches thermodynamics and combustion theory in jet engines. His study of birds says they reveal design.
A feather is a marvelous example of lightweight aerodynamic engineering. That really is what it is. And it shows aspects of design all over its surface. You've got the very important rachis, which is the main stem, which is hollow. From the rachis comes barbules either side, and from the barbules, which you can't see unless you look at this under a microscope, there are tiny little hooks on one side, which we call barbules, and on the other side are ridges. So it's always going alternately, hooks, ridges, hooks, ridges, hooks, ridges. So the hooks from one barbule grab the ridges from the adjacent barbule.
It's hard to imagine a complex flying machine forming by mindless processes. The probability seems so low, even spread across long time periods. What if there are structures that can't evolve gradually? What good is a partly evolved linkage mechanism?
The problems in evolving from a lizard to a bird. Number one, you've got the feather arrangement, which the barbules are different on one side of the barb to the other. There's no way that could have come about by accident. The feathers are different as well, different positions. So you've got feathers. You've got to be able to oil those feathers, so you need a preening gland. Where's the preening gland going to come from? Lizards don't go around with preening glands. But then thirdly, you've got to have the ability to get at the preening gland. So you've got to turn your head 180 degrees, bend over backwards to get it. Then fourthly, you've got to have a different arrangement for energy production, because a lizard is cold-blooded, gets the energy from the sun, has to lay out there, bask in the sun to get its body to the right temperature. A bird is warm-blooded, so the whole energy arrangement and the blood system is totally different. And then probably the worst one of all is that a bird doesn't have a diaphragm, and it has a lung which is totally different, both to mammals and to reptiles. We've limited it to 5, but really it's stacks of things which have got to be just right in order to go from a reptile to a bird.
Oxford University chemistry professor Peter Atkins is a leading new atheist who has authored over 70 books.
Unless you're really lazy or extremely sentimental, then you really have to look underneath the apparent design and see whether it could spring from happen chance. That it could just be the way that the world is working itself out. And that is my view. And that is really the view that a scientist would take, that they would see that all this wonder that we see around us is emerging from much simpler entities underneath. There is no design.
Oxford mathematics professor John Lennox challenges the idea that DNA arose by chance.
And so it boils down to the claim that unguided natural processes can generate information. And this is where the computer scientists and the information scientists prick up their ears. Because junk in, junk out. There is no evidence whatsoever that unguided natural processes produce information at all. Natural processes can transmit it, but they do not produce it.
If one really wants to take a scientific worldview, you should accept ideas only when there is evidence to support them. Speculations are fun, but they're not replacements for evidence. There are some questions which science feels sure that it can answer, but it would be a false claim to say that they have currently been answered.
We haven't seen the big transitions. People argue that there's fossil evidence of them, but we haven't actually seen them happen. And when someone like the geneticist, the Harvard geneticist, Richard Lewontin, says, evolution is a fact, like the orbiting of the planets round the sun is a fact. And then he goes on to say, non-birds became birds. But just a minute. Apart from the very important question as to what a non-bird might be, nobody's ever seen a non-bird become a bird. And he's making a fundamental confusion between two kinds of science. One we could call empirical laboratory science, and the other we could talk about as historical science, that is, inferring something happened in the past. But he's got no mechanism. So to say that the thing that hasn't been observed is in the same category as the observed is to make a very serious fundamental error.
Nature doesn't exactly carry a brand name. But wouldn't curiosity make you want to keep looking? Evolutionary theory deserves to be questioned. Could chemicals really self-organize into such amazing microtechnologies just by happen chance? Or do you see a mind behind nature? What do you think?